Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll be reading chapter 5 of the Booker T. Washington book, The Future of the American Negro, page 106.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
The Future of the American Negro, Chapter 5, page 106. In this chapter, I wish to show how, at Tuskegee, we are trying to work out the plan of industrial training and trust I shall be pardoned the seeming egoism if I preface the sketch with a few words. By way of example, as to the expansion of my own life and how I came to undertake the work at Tuskegee. My earliest recollection is of a small one-room log hut on a slave plantation in Virginia. After the close of the war, while working in the coal mines of West Virginia for the support of my mother, I heard, in some accidental way, of the Hampton Institute. When I learned that it was an institution where a Black boy could study, could have a chance to work for his board, and at the same time be taught how to work and to realize the dignity of labor, I resolved to go there. Bidding my mother goodbye, I started out one morning to find my way to Hampton. Although I was almost penniless and had no definite idea as to where Hampton was, by walking, begging rides, and paying for a portion of the journey on steam cars, I finally succeeded in reaching the city of Richmond, Virginia. I was without money or friends. I slept on a sidewalk, and by working on a vessel the next day, I earned enough money to continue my way to the Institute, where I arrived with a capital of 50 cents. At Hampton, I found the opportunity, in the way of buildings, teachers, and industries provided by the generous, to get training in the classroom and by practical touch with industrial life, to learn thrift, economy, and push. I was surrounded by an atmosphere of business, Christian influence, and spirit of self-help that seemed to have awakened every faculty in me and caused me for the first time to realize what it meant to be a man instead of a piece of property. So he felt that working for his wages instead of being a piece of property made him feel like a man instead of feeling like a piece of property. While there, I resolved that when I had finished the course of training, I would go into the far South, into the black belt of the South, and give my life to providing the same kind of opportunity for self reliance, self awakening that I have found provided for me at Hampton. My work at Tuskegee, Alabama began at Tuskegee, Alabama in 1881 in a small shanty church with one teacher and 30 students without a dollar's worth of property. The spirit of work and of industrial thrift, with aid from the state and generosity from the North, have enabled us to develop an institution which now has about 1,000 students gathered from 23 states and 88 instructors. Counting students, instructors, and their families, we have a resident population upon the school grounds of about 1,200 persons. The institution owns 2,300 acres of land, 700 of which are cultivated by student labor. There are 600 head of livestock, including horses, mules, cows, hogs, and sheep. There are over 40 vehicles that have been made and are now used by the school. Training is given in 26 industries. There is work in wood, in iron, in leather, in tin, and in all forms of domestic economy are engaged in. Students are taught mechanical, architectural drawing, receive training as agriculturalists, dairymen, masons, carpenters, contractors, builders, as machinists, electricians, printers, dressmakers, and milliners, and in other directions. The value of the property is $300,000. There are 42 buildings counting large and small, all of which, with the exception of 4, have been erected by the labor of the students. Since this work started, there has been collected and spent for its founding and support $800,000. The annual expense is now not far from $75,000. In a humble, simple manner, the effort has been to place a great object lesson in the heart of the South for the elevation of the colored people, where there should be, in a high sense, that union of head, heart, and hand, which has been the foundation of the greatness of all races since the world began. What is the object of all this outlay? It must be first borne in mind that we have in the South a peculiar and unprecedented state of things. The cardinal needs among the 8 million colored people in the South, most of whom are to be found on the plantations, may be stated as food, clothing, shelter, education, proper habits, and settlement of race relations. These millions of colored people of the South cannot be reached directly by any missionary agent, but they can be reached by sending out among them strong, selected young men and women with the proper training of head, hand, and heart, who live among them and show them how to lift themselves up. The problem that the Tuskegee Institute keeps before itself constantly is how to prepare these leaders. From the outset, in connection with religious and academic training, it is emphasized industrial or hand training as a means of finding the way out of present conditions. First, we have found the industrial teaching useful in giving the student a chance to work out a portion of his expenses while in school. Second, the school furnishes labor that has an economic value and at the same time gives the student a chance to acquire knowledge and skill while performing the labor. Most of all, we value the industrial system, valuable in teaching economy, thrift, and the dignity of labor, and in giving moral backbone to students. The fact that a student goes into the world conscious of his power to build a house or a wagon or to make a set of harness give him a certain confidence and moral independence that he would not possess without such training. A more detailed example of our methods at Tuskegee may be of interest. For example, we cultivate by student labor 700 acres of land. The object is not only to cultivate the land in a way to make it pay our boarding department, but at the same time to teach the students, in addition to practical work, something of the chemistry of the soil, the best methods of drainage, dairying, cultivation of fruit, the care of livestock and tools, and scores of other lessons needed by people whose main dependence is on agriculture. So he wanted them to focus on and become specialized at agriculture because that was a subsistence field of study, something that once they learned and mastered it, they would at least be able to feed themselves and then they'd be able to trade with others while they were feeding themselves. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. Thank you for tuning in. Friends some time ago provided means for the erection of a large new chapel at Tuskegee. Our students made the bricks for this chapel. A large part of the timber was sawed by the students at our sawmill. The plans were drawn by our teacher of architectural and mechanical drawing, and the students did the brick masonry, the plastering, the painting, the carpentry work, the tinning, the slating, and made most of the furniture. Practically the whole chapel was built and furnished by student labor. Now, the school has this building for permanent use, and the students have a knowledge of the trades employed in its construction. While the young men do the kinds of work I have mentioned, young women, to a large extent, make, mend, and laundry the clothing of the young men. They also receive instruction in dairying, horticulture, and other valuable industries. One of the objections sometimes urged against industrial education for the Negro is that it aims merely to teach him to work on the same plan that he worked on when in slavery. This is far from being the object at Tuskegee. At the head of each of the 26 industrial divisions, we have an intelligent and competent instructor, just as we have our history classes so that the student is taught not only practical brick masonry, for example, but also the underlying principles of that industry, the mathematics and the mechanical and architectural drawing. Or he is taught how to become master of the forces of nature so that instead of cultivating corn in the old way, he will use a corn cultivator that lays off the furrows, drops the corn into them, and covers it. And in this way, he can do more work than 3 men by the old process of corn planting, while at the same time, much of the toil is eliminated and labor is dignified. So he's talking about using technological advancements in these different fields of study so that you work smarter, not harder. In a word, the constant aim is to show the student how to put brains into every process of labor, how to bring his knowledge of mathematics and the sciences in farming, carpentry, foraging, boundary work, how to dispense as soon as possible the old form of antebellum labor or of slave labor. Greetings, Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. In the erection of the chapel referred to, instead of letting the money which was given to us by outside hands, we made to accomplish 3 objects. First, it provided the chapel. Second, it gave the students a chance to get a practical knowledge of the trades connected with the building. And third, it enabled them to earn something toward the payment of their board while receiving academic and industrial training. Having been fortified at Tuskegee by education of mind, skill of hand, Christian character, ideals of thrift, economy, and push, and a spirit of independence, the student is sent out to become a center of influence and light in showing the masses of our people in the Black Belt of the South how to lift themselves up. Can this be done? I give but one or two examples. 10 years ago, a colored man came to the Institute from one of the large plantation districts. He studied in the classroom a portion of the time and received practical and theoretical training on the farm the remainder of the time. Having finished his course at Tuskegee, he returned to his plantation home, which was in a county where the colored people outnumbered the whites 6-1, as is true of many counties in the Black Belt of the South. He found the Negroes in debt. Ever since the war, they had been mortgaging their crops for food on which to live while the crops were growing. So they were going into debt before actually being able to see a profit. This is sharecropping. Okay. The majority of them were living from hand to mouth on rented land in small one-room log cabins and attempting to pay a rate of interest on their advances that ranged from 15 to 40% per annum. The school had been taught in a wreck. The school had been taught in a wreck of a log cabin with no apparatus and had never been in session longer than 3 months out of 12. He found the people, as many as 8 or 10 persons of all ages and conditions and of both sexes, huddled together, living in one-room cabins year after year, and with a minister whose only aim was to work upon the emotions. One can imagine something of the moral and religious state of the community. But the remedy, in spite of the evil, the Negro got the habit of work from slavery. The rank and file of the race, especially those on the southern plantations, work hard. But the trouble is that what they earn gets away from them in high rents, crop mortgages, whiskey, snuff, cheap jewelry, and the like. The young man just referred to had been trained at Tuskegee, as most of our graduates are, to meet just this condition of things. He took the 3 months public school as a nucleus for his work. He organized the older people into a club or conference that held meetings every week. In these meetings, he taught the people in a plain, simple manner how to save their money, how to farm in a better way, how to sacrifice, which is missing from today. People don't want to sacrifice today so that they can have a better future for tomorrow. At the end of this, I'll tell you my ideas about heaven and hell. To live on bread and potatoes if necessary till they could get out of debt and begin buying the lands. Soon, a large proportion of the people were in a condition to make contracts for the buying of homes. Land is very cheap in the South, and to live without mortgaging their crops. Not only this, under the guidance and leadership of this teacher, the first year that he was among them, they learned how and built by contributions in money and labor, a neat, comfortable schoolhouse that replaced the wreck of a log cabin formerly used. The following year, the weekly meetings were continued and 2 months were added to the original 3 months of school. The next year, 2 more months were added. The improvement has gone on until these people have every year an 8-month school. Greetings, Black Magus. Thanks for tuning in. I wish my readers could have the chance that I have had of going into this community. I wish they could look into the faces of the people and see them beaming with hope and delight. I wish they could see the 2 or 3 room cottages that have taken the place of the usual 1 room cabin, see the well cultivated farms and the religious life of the people that now means something more than a name. The teacher has a good cottage and well kept farm that serve as models. In a word, a complete revolution has been wrought in the industrial, education, and religious life of this whole community by reason of the fact that they have had this leader. This guide, give me one moment, this guide an object lesson to show them how to take the money and effort that hitherto had been scattered to the wind in mortgages and how to concentrate it on the direction of their own uplifting. One community on its feet presents the object lessons for the adjoining communities, and soon improvements show themselves in other places. Another student who received academic and industrial training at Tuskegee established himself 3 years ago as a blacksmith and wheelwright in a community. And in addition to the influence of his successful business enterprise, he is fast making the same kinds of changes in the life of people about him that I have just recounted. It could be easy for me, it would be easy for me to fill many pages describing the influence of the Tuskegee graduates in every part of the South. That's true, and that's so true that he wrote a book about it, talking about Tuskegee and its people, and he highlights many of the different graduates of different programs at Tuskegee and what they were doing. Continuing. We keep it constantly in the minds of our students and graduates that the industrial or material condition of the masses of our people must be improved, as well as the intellectual, before there can be any permanent change in their moral and religious life. We find it pretty hard to make a good Christian of a hungry man. No matter how much our people get happy or shout in church, if they go home at night from church hungry, they are tempted to find something to eat before morning. This is a principle of human nature and is not confined alone to the Negro. The Negro has within him immense power for self-uplifting, but for years it will be necessary to guide him and stimulate his energies. The recognition of this power led us to organize 5 years ago what is known as the Tuskegee Negro Conference, a gathering that meets every February and is composed of about 800 representatives, colored men and women from all sections of the Black Belt. They come in on ox carts and mule carts, buggies and on muleback and on horseback, on foot and by railroad. Some travel all night in order to be present. The matters considered at the conference are those that the colored people have it in their own power to control, such as the evils of the mortgage system, the 1 room cabin, buying on credit, the importance of owning a home and of putting money in a bank, and how to build schoolhouses and prolong the school term, and to improve their moral and religious condition. As a single example of the results, one delegate reported that since the conference has started 7 years ago, 11 people in his neighborhood had bought homes, 14 had gotten out of debt, and a number had stopped mortgaging their crops. Moreover, a schoolhouse had been built by the people themselves, and the school term had been extended from 3 to 6 months. And with a look of triumph, he exclaimed, "We done living in the ashes." Besides this Negro conference for the masses of the people, we now have a gathering at the same time known as the Tuskegee Workers' Conference, composed of the officers and instructors of the leading colored schools in the South. After listening to the story of the conditions and needs from the people themselves, the Workers' Conference finds much food for thought and discussion. Let me repeat, from its beginning, this institution has kept in mind the giving of thorough mental and religious training, along with such industrial training that would enable the students to appreciate the dignity of labor and become self supporting and valuable as a producing factor, keeping in mind the occupations open in the South to the average man of the race, so they would not overeducate them in fruitless things. They would give them an education worthy that had dignity that they could actually find a job in without having a lot of debt. So totally different from our academic system today. This institution has now reached the point where it can begin to judge the values of its work as it's seen in its graduates. Some years ago, we noted the fact, for example, that there was quite a movement in many parts of the South to organize and start dairies. Soon after this, we opened a dairy school where a number of young men would receive training in the best and most scientific methods of dairying. So he again brought them the technological know how to uplift themselves. At present, we have calls mainly from Southern white men for twice as many dairymen as we are able to supply. The reports indicate that our young men are giving the highest satisfaction and are fast changing and improving the dairy product in their communities where they labor. I have used the dairy industry simply as an example. What I have said of this industry is true in a larger or less degree of others. I cannot but believe, and my daily observation and experience confirm me in it, that that as we continue placing men and women of intelligence, religion, modesty, conscience, and skill in every community in the South, who will prove by actual results their value to the community, this will constitute the solution for many of the present political and sociological difficulties. That was his hope, but that wasn't really true because white people got jealous. It is with this larger and more comprehensive view of improving present conditions and laying the foundation wisely at the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute is training men and women as teachers and industrial leaders. Over 400 students have finished the course of training at this institution and are now scattered throughout the South doing good work. A recent investigation shows that about 3,000 students who have taken only a partial course are doing commendable work. One young man who was able to remain in school but 2 years has been teaching one community for about 10 years. During this time, he has built a new schoolhouse, extended the school term from 3 to 7 months, and has brought a nice farm upon which he has erected a neat cottage. The example of this young man has inspired many of the colored people in this community to follow his example in some degree. And this is one of many examples. Wherever our graduates and ex-students go, they teach by precept and example the necessary lesson of thrift, economy, and property getting, and friendship between the races. So as you can see, he had a lot of hope for being able to produce citizens and putting them in communities, feeling that once these citizens were placed in communities, then race relations would naturally heal. He did not account for the jealousy of white people being so envious of black people destroying their property. And he doesn't say anything about the lynchings that were happening and the jealousy. He doesn't say anything about that. Chapter 6. It has become apparent that the effort to put the rank and file of the colored people into a position to exercise the right of the franchise or the right to vote has not been the success that was expected in those portions of our country where the Negro is found in large numbers. Either the Negro was not prepared for any such wholesale exercise of the ballot as our recent amendments to the Constitution contemplated, or the American people were not prepared to assist and encourage him to use the ballot. In either case, the result has been the same. On an important occasion in the life of the master, when it fell upon him to pronounce judgment on two courses of action, these memorable words fell from his lips, and Mary hath chosen the better part. This was the supreme test in the case of an individual. It is the highest test in the case of a race or a nation. Let us apply this test to the American Negro. In the life of our republic, when he has had the opportunity to choose, has it been the better or worse part? When in the childhood of this nation, the Negro was asked to submit to slavery or choose death and extinction as the Aborigines, he chose the better part, which perpetuated the race. When in 1776, the Negro was asked to decide between British oppression and American independence, we find him choosing the better part, and Crispus Attucks, a Negro, a mulatto just like Booker T. Washington, was the first to shed blood on State Street, Boston, that the white American might enjoy liberty forever, though his race remained in slavery. When in 1814 at the New Orleans, the test of patriotism came again, we find the Negro choosing the better part, General Andrew Jackson himself testifying that no heart was more loyal and no arm more strong and useful in the defense of righteousness. When the long and memorable struggle came between union and separation, when he knew that victory meant freedom and defeat his continued enslavement, although enlisting by the thousands as opportunity presented itself to fight in honorable combat for the cause of the Union and liberty, yet when the suggestion and the contemplation and temptation came to burn the home and massacre the wife and children during the absence of the master in battle, and thus ensure his liberty, we find him choosing the better part, and for 4 long years protecting and supporting the helpless, defenseless ones entrusted to his care. He's talking about the slaves that stayed on the plantations to take care of the families while the Confederates went to war against the Union. When during our war with Spain, the safety and honor of the Republic were threatened by a foreign foe, when the wail and anguish of the oppressed from a distant isle reached our ears, we find the Negro forgetting his own wrongs, forgetting the laws and customs that discriminate against him in his own country, and again choosing the better part. And if anyone would know how he acquitted himself in the field at Santiago, let him apply for answer to Shafter and Roosevelt and Wheeler. Let them tell how the Negro faced death and laid down his life in defense of honor and humanity. When the full story of the heroic conduct of the Negro in the Spanish-American War has been heard from the lips of Northern soldier and Southern soldier, from ex-abolitionist and ex-slave master, when the country decides whether then shall the country decide whether a race that is thus willing to die for its country should not be given the highest opportunity to live for its country. In the midst of all the complaints of suffering in the camp and field during the Spanish-American War, suffering from fever and hunger, where is the official or citizen that has heard a word of complaint from the lips of a Black soldier? The only request that came from the Negro soldier was that he might be permitted to replace the white soldier when heat and malaria began to decimate the ranks of the white regiments, and to occupy at the same time the post of greater danger. But when all this is said, it remains true that the efforts on the part of his friends and the part of himself to share actively in the control of state and local government in America have not been a success in all sections. What are the causes of this partial failure, and what lessons has it taught that we may use in regard to the future treatment of the Negro in America? So after going through all of this, they still don't have adequate voting representation or representation in the legal and judicial systems. In my mind, there is no doubt but that we made a mistake at the beginning of our freedom of putting the emphasis on the wrong end. Politics and the holding of office were too largely emphasized, almost to the exclusion of every other interest. I believe the past and present teach but one lesson. To the Negro's friends and to the Negro himself, that there is but one way out, that there is but one hope of one solution, and that is for the Negro in every part of America to resolve from henceforth that he will throw aside every non-essential and cling on only to the essential, that his pillar of fire by night and pillar of cloud by day shall be property, economy, education, and Christian character. To us, just now, these are the wheat, all else is the chaff. The individual or race that owns property, pays the taxes, possesses the intelligence and substantial character is the one which is going to exercise the greatest control in government, whether he lives in the North or whether he lives in the South. I have often been asked the cause of and the cure for the riots that have taken place recently in North Carolina and South Carolina back in 1898. I am not at all sure that what I shall say will answer these questions in a satisfactory way, nor shall I attempt to narrow my expressions to a mere recital of what has taken place in these two states. I prefer to discuss the problem in a broader manner. In the first place, in politics, I am a Republican, but have always refrained from activity in party politics and expect to pursue this policy in the future. So, in this connection, I shall refrain, as I always have done, from entering any discussion of mere party politics. What I shall say of politics will bear upon the race problem and the civilization of the South in the larger sense. In no case would I permit my political relations to stand in the way of my speaking and acting in the manner that I believe would be for the permanent interest of my race and the whole South. In 1873, the Negro in the South had reached the point of greatest activity and influence in public life. So far as the mere holding of elective office was concerned, from the date of those who have kept up with the history of the South have noticed that the Negro has steadily lost in the number of elective offices held. In saying this, I do not mean that the Negro has gone backward in the real and more fundamental things of life. On the contrary, he has gone forward faster than has been true of any other race in history under anything like similar circumstances. If we can answer the question as to why the Negro has lost ground in the matter of holding elective office once in the South, perhaps we shall find that our reply will prove to be our answer also as to the cause of the recent riots in North Carolina and South Carolina. Before beginning a discussion of the question I have asked, I wish to say that this change in the political influence of the Negro has continued from year to year, notwithstanding the fact that for a long time he was protected politically by force of federal arms and the most rigid federal laws, and still more effectively, perhaps, the voice and influence in the halls of legislation, such as advocates of the rights of the Negro race, as Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, Benjamin F. Butler, James M. Ashley, Oliver P. Morton, Carl Schurz, and Roscoe Conkling, and on the stump and through the public press by those great and powerful Negroes, Frederick Douglass, John M. Langston, Blanche K. Bruce, John R. Lynch, P.B.S. Pinchback, Robert Brown Elliott, T. Thomas Fortune, and many others. But the Negro has continued for 20 years to have fewer representatives in the state and national legislatures. The reduction has continued until now. It is at the point where, with few exceptions, he is without representatives in the lawmaking bodies of the state and the nation. Now let us find, if we can, a cause for this. The Negro is fond of saying that his present condition is due to the fact that the state and federal courts have not sustained the laws passed for the protection of rights of his people. I think we shall have to go deeper than this, because I believe that all agree that court decisions, as a rule, represent the public opinion of the community or nation creating and sustaining the court. We don't necessarily find that to be true to this day, because we find that the court operates autonomously or independently, reaffirming whatever ideas that individual brought into the court. So they are not necessarily a reflection of public opinion. At the beginning of his freedom, it was unfortunate that those of the white race who won the political confidence of the Negro were not, with few exceptions, men of such high character as would lead them to assist him in laying a firm foundation for his development. Their main purpose appears to have been, for selfish ends in too many instances, merely to control his vote. The history of the Reconstruction era will show that this was unfortunate for all the parties in interest. It would have been better from any point of view if the native Southern white man had taken the Negro at the beginning of his freedom into his political confidence and exercised an influence and control over him before his political affections were alienated. The average Southern white man has an idea today that if the Negro were permitted to get any political power, all the mistakes of the Reconstruction period would be repeated. He forgets or ignores the fact that 30 years of acquiring education, property, and character have produced a higher type of Black man than existed 30 years ago. But to be more specific, for all practical purposes, there are two political parties in the South, a Black man's party and a white man's party. In saying this, I do not mean to say that all white men are Democrats, for there are some white men in the South of the highest character who are Republicans, and there are a few Negroes in the South of the highest character who are Democrats. It is the general understanding that all white men are Democrats or the equivalent, and that all Black men are Republicans. So long as the color line is the dividing line in politics, so long there will there be trouble. The white man feels that he owns most of the property, furnishes the Negro most of his employment, thinks he pays the most of the taxes, and has had years of experience in government. There is no mistaking the fact that the feeling which has hitherto governed the Negro, that to many, that to be manly and to stand by his race, he must oppose the Southern white man with his vote, has had much to do with intensifying the opposition of the Southern white man to him. The Southern white man says that it is unreasonable for the Negro to come to him in a large measure for his clothes, board, shelter, and education, and for his politics to go to men 1,000 miles away. He very properly argues that when the Negro votes, he should try to consult the interests of his employer, just as the Pennsylvania employee tries to vote for the interests of his employer. Further, that much of the education which has been given to the Negro has been defective in not preparing him to love labor and to earn his living at some special industry, and has in many cases resulted in tempting him to live by his wits as a political creature or by trusting to his influence as a political time server. Then there is no mistaking the fact that much opposition to the Negro in politics is due to the circumstance that the Southern white man has not become accustomed to seeing the Negro exercise political power, either as a voter or as an office holder. Again, we want to bear it in mind that the South has not yet reached the point where there is the strict regard for the enforcement of the law against either white or Black men that there is in many of our northern and western states. This laxity in the enforcement of the laws in general, and especially of criminal laws, makes such outbreaks as those in North Carolina and South Carolina of easy occurrence. So he's saying that the lynchings and the riots that were happening in Black towns in North and South Carolina in 1898 were easy to happen because there was not enough law enforcement at that time in those places to uphold the rights of the Negro. And he believed that by producing stellar students and scholars and independent citizens that would go into business in these communities, that he would be able to offset some of that because the Black man would be able to earn the white man's respect because he would be a productive member of society. Then there is one other consideration which must not be overlooked. It is the common opinion of almost every Black man and almost every white man that nearly everybody who has had anything to do with the making of laws bearing upon the protection of the Negro vote has proceeded on behalf proceeded on the theory that all the black men for all time will vote the Republican ticket, and that all the white men in the South will vote the Democratic ticket. In a word, all seem to have taken it for granted that the two races are always going to oppose each other in their voting. In all the foregoing statements, I have not attempted to define my own views or position, but simply to describe conditions as I have observed them that might throw light upon the cause of our political troubles. As to my own position, I do not favor the Negroes giving up anything which is fundamental and which has been guaranteed to him by the Constitution of the United States. It is not best for him to relinquish any of his rights, nor would his doing so be best for the Southern white man. Every law placed in the Constitution of the United States was placed there to encourage and stimulate the highest citizenship. If the Negro is not stimulated and encouraged by just state and national laws to become the highest type of citizen, the result will be worse for the Southern white man than for the Negro. Take the state of South Carolina, for example, where nearly two-thirds of the population are Negroes. Unless these Negroes are encouraged by just election laws to become taxpayers and intelligent producers, the white people of South Carolina will have an eternal millstone about their necks. In an open letter to the State Constitutional Convention of Louisiana, I wrote, "I am no politician. On the other hand, I have always advised my race to give attention to acquiring property, intelligence, and character as the necessary basis of good citizenship rather than to mere political agitation." But the question upon which I write is out of the region of ordinary politics. It affects the civilization of the two races, not for today alone, but for a very long time to come. Since the war, no state has had such an opportunity to settle for all time the race question so far as it concerns politics as is now given to Louisiana. Will your convention set an example to the world in this respect? Will Louisiana take such high and just grounds in respect to the Negro that no one can doubt that the South is just as good a friend to him as he possesses everywhere elsewhere? In all this, gentlemen of the convention, I am not pleading for the Negro alone, but for the morals, the higher life of the white man as well. The Negro agrees that with you that it is necessary to the salvation of the South that restrictions be put upon the ballot. I know that you have two serious problems before you. Ignorant and corrupt, compelled to travel during the last 30 years, has been strewn with thorns and thistles. It has been one groping through the long darkness into the light. The time is not far distant when the world will begin to appreciate the real character of the burden that has been imposed upon the South in giving the franchise to 4 millions of ignorant and impoverished ex-slaves. No people was ever before given such a problem to solve. History has blazed no path through the wilderness that could be followed. For 30 years we have wandered in that wilderness. We are now beginning to get out, but there is only one road out, and all makeshifts, expedients, profit and loss calculations lead into swamps, quicksands, quagmires, and jungles. There is a highway that will lead both races out into the pure, beautiful sunshine, where there will be nothing to hide and nothing to explain, where both races can grow strong and true and useful in every fiber of their being. I believe that your convention will find this highway, that it will enact a fundamental law that will be absolutely just and fair to white and black alike. Now remember, in Louisiana, they have the colored people problem, the Creole challenge, the passing issue is more of an issue there than it is anywhere else because they had the French and they had all that mixing and different things like that. He continues his letter to the Louisiana Constitutional Convention. I beg of you further that in the degree that you close the ballot box against the ignorant, you will open the schoolhouse. More than one half of the population of your state are Negroes. No state can long prosper when a large part of its citizenship is in ignorance and poverty and has no interest in the government. I beg of you that you do not treat us as an alien people. We are not aliens. You know us. You know that we have cleared your forests, tilled your fields, nursed your children, and protected your families. There is an attachment between us that few understand. While I do not presume to be able to advise you, yet it is in my heart to say, if your convention would do something that would prevent for all time strained relations between the two races and would permanently settle the matter of political relations in one southern state at least, let the very best educational opportunities be provided for both races, and add to this an election law that shall be incapable of unjust discrimination, at the same time providing that, in proportion as the ignorant secure education, property, and character, they will be given the right of citizenship. Any other course will take from one half your citizens' interest in the state and hope and ambition to become intelligent producers and taxpayers and useful and virtuous citizens. Any other course will tie the white citizens of Louisiana to a body of death. The Negroes are not unmindful of the fact that the poverty of the state prevents it from doing all that it desires for public education. Yet I believe that you will agree with me that ignorance is more costly to the state than education, that it will cost Louisiana more not to educate Negroes than it will to educate them. In connection with a generous provision for public schools, I believe that nothing so will so help my own people in your state as provision as some institution for the highest academic and normal training in connection with thorough training in agriculture, mechanics, and domestic economy. First class training in agriculture, horticulture, dairying, stock raising, the mechanical arts, and domestic economy will make us intelligent producers and not only help us contribute our honest share as taxpayers, but will result in retaining much money in the state that now goes outside for that which can be well produced at home. An institution which will give this training of hand along with the highest mental culture would soon convince our people that their salvation is largely in the ownership of property and industrial business development rather than mere political agitation. The highest test of the civilization of any race is in its willingness to extend a helping hand to the less fortunate. A race, like an individual, a race, like an individual, lifts itself up by lifting others up. Surely no people ever had a greater chance to exhibit the highest Christian fortitude and magnanimity than is now presented to the people of Louisiana. It requires little wisdom or statesmanship to repress, to crush out, to retard the hopes and aspirations of a people, but the highest and most profound statesmanship is shown in guiding and stimulating a people so that every fiber in the body and soul shall be made to contribute in the highest degree to the usefulness and ability of the state. It is along this line that I pray God the thoughts and activities of your convention may be guided. So he was begging them to invest in education so that they could create a more well informed electorate. He was begging them to invest in normal schools so that people would have the preparation and the mental preparation ready to exercise full citizenship. As to such outbreaks have recently occurred in North Carolina and South Carolina, the remedy will not be reached by the Southern white man merely depriving the Negro of his rights and privileges. This method is but superficial, irritating, and must, in the nature of things, be short lived. To the Enlightenment, the statesman to cure an evil resorts to enlightenment, to stimulation, the politician to repression. I have just remarked that I favor the giving up of nothing that is guaranteed to us by the Constitution of the United States or that is fundamental to our citizenship. While I will hold to these views as strongly as anyone, I differ with some as to the method of securing the permanent and peaceful enjoyment of all the privileges guaranteed to us by our fundamental law. In finding a remedy, we must recognize the worldwide fact that the Negro must be led to see and feel that he must make every effort possible in every way possible to secure the friendship, the confidence, and the cooperation of his white neighbor in the South. To do this, it it is not necessary for the Negro to become a truckler or a trimmer. The Southern white man has no respect for the Negro who does not act from principle. In some way, the white man, the Southern white man, must be led to see that it is to his interest to turn his attention more and more to making laws that will, in the truest sense, elevate the Negro. At the present moment, in many cases, when one attempts to get the Negro to cooperate with the Southern white man, he asks the question, can people who force me to ride in a Jim Crow car and pay first class fare be my best friends? In answering such questions, the Southern white man, as well as the Negro, has a duty to perform. In the exercise of his political rights, I should advise the Negro to be temperate and modest and more do his own thinking. I believe the permanent cure for our present evils will come through property and educational testing for voting that shall apply honestly and fairly to both races. This will cut off the large mass of ignorant voters of both races that is now proving so demoralizing a factor in the politics of the Southern states. But most of all, it will come through industrial development of the Negro. Industrial education makes an intelligent producer of the Negro who becomes of immediate value to the community rather than one who yields to the temptation to live merely by politics or other parasitical employments. It will make him soon become a property holder, and when a citizen becomes a holder of property, he becomes conservative and thoughtful as a voter. He will more carefully consider the measures and individuals to be voted for. In proportion as he increases his property interest, he becomes important as a taxpayer. There is little trouble between the Negro and the white man in matters of education, and when it comes to his business development, the black man has implicit faith in the advice of the Southern white man. When he gets into trouble in the courts, which requires a bond to be given, in 9 cases out of 10, he goes to a Southern white man for advice and assistance. Everyone who has lived in the South knows that in many of the churches, in many of the church troubles among the colored people, the ministers and other church officers apply to the nearest white minister for assistance and instruction. When by reason of mutual concession, we reach the point that we shall consult the Southern white man about our politics, as we now consult him about our business, legal, and religious matters, there will be a change for the better in the situation. The object lesson of 1,000 Negroes in every county in the South who own neat and comfortable homes, possessing skill, industry, and thrift with money in the bank, and are large taxpayers, cooperating with the white men in the South in every manly way for the development of their own communities and counties will go a long way in a few years toward changing the present status of the Negro as a citizen, as well as the attitude of the whites towards blacks. I don't agree with him there, but we're going to continue reading. As the Negro grows in industrial and business directions, he will divide his politics on economic issues just as the white man in other parts of the country now divides his vote. As the South grows in business prosperity, it will divide its vote on economic issues, just as other sections of the country divide their vote. When we can enact laws that result in honestly cutting off the large and ignorant and non tax paying vote, and when we can bring both races to the point where they will cooperate with each other in politics as they do now in matters of business, religion, and education, the problem will in large measure be solved and political outbreaks will cease. And that is the end of chapter 6. Tomorrow we'll be reading chapter 7, a standalone unit. Now, I promised you guys I would discuss with you my ideas of heaven and hell when he talks about sacrifice. I believe that if you're going to teach heaven and hell to anyone, you should teach them that if they are not living in a flourishing, thriving community where their skills, talents, and gifts are utilized, that they should be taught that they are currently in hell or that their ancestors went through hell so that they could live in a more comfortable life. So that's why you teach them about suffering and you teach them about sacrifice. So someone had to sacrifice for you to live the life that you live. And those people were in a version of hell because they couldn't live off of all the money that they were making because they were saving it for the next generation and the next generation. And they were acquiring assets and getting life insurance and they were being financially responsible. They were not just spendthrifts, and they were in a version of hell so that the next generation could have another measure of comfort and another measure of comfort. And each generation gets another measure of comfort until one generation is finally able to get to heaven. So Those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for listening tonight, Anthony McPhail, Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast and Black Magus. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to read Chapter 7 only, and then we're going to read Chapter 8 only. If you guys have questions or want to talk about some of this content, because I think that Booker T. Washington has some very interesting ideas, please let me know and I will drop the link and we can discuss it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he was an accommodationist and he wanted to pacify white people. And he thought that by educating Black people and then putting them back into white communities, that they would be able to live comfortably side by side with white people. He was in favor of poll tests and voter tests and probably poll taxes as well, based on some of the things that he's saying. So all right. Thank each and every one of you. I know that Bwana Guziki is listening. I know that Brother Bakari is listening. I know that Sister Ron, the elders that listen with her are listening. I know that the forecast is listening. I know that Dorico Cooper is listening. I know that the children at Jesse's Kids are listening. I know that the children at the Daycare Ladies Network are listening. I know that people at the Coffee Cafe in Southfield, Michigan are listening. I know that Tinkerbell 87 is listening. I know that Ray Ray 88 is listening. So I thank each and every one of you for tuning in tonight. Oh, and I know that Oni from the Pro Black Perspective is listening. I thank each and every one of you for tuning in tonight, and I will see you tomorrow. Peace, guys.